name is Harold Davis. I'm here to teach you about the art and craft of digital photography.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harold Davis Studio in Berkeley, California. We are so pleased to have you with us today. Today's webinar is the Blossfeldt effect. Karl Blossfeldt began his career at a decorative ironwork manufacturer. He was assigned the task of creating reference botanical photographs to use for wrought iron designs. Eventually, his iconic botanical images became celebrated in their own right, and today he is known as one of history's foremost botanical photographers. Harold has long been fascinated by Blossfeldt's botanical imagery and has developed a set of techniques for emulating the beautiful photographs of this master. Some of Harold's work in homage to Blossfeldt has even been mistaken for the real thing. In this unique and creative webinar, Harold will start with a look at the characteristics of a Blossfeldian composition. What kinds of subjects did Blossfeldt choose to photograph and why? What makes a particular botanical specimen visually exciting? Next, Harold will explore two possible places to start with Blossfeldian botanical compositions, the black background and the light box. To cap it off, Harold will demonstrate how he processes his Blossfeldt-like images using some surprisingly simple yet tricky steps. Many of you know who Harold Davis is, but if you are joining us for the first time today, here's a little bit about Harold. Harold Davis is an artist, photographer, and author. His most recent books include Creative Black and White, second edition, and Creative Garden Photography, both published by Rocky Nook. Harold is the developer of a unique technique for photographing flowers for transparency and an innovator of digital multi-raw processing and hand HDR processing. Harold is an internationally known photographer. His prints are widely collected, and he is a sought-after workshop leader. He is a Moab master and a Zeiss ambassador. Harold's website is digitalfieldguide.com. Now I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to Harold.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. And I already feel I have been. You're handing it over to me. It was my control in the first place. Please put questions into the chat box. I will try to answer questions as I go along. I'm going to start in a minute with a slideshow. Then we have a little movie for the first example. Then I'm going to show processing the first example. And I have to tell you that I'm ad-libbing. This is something I photographed basically with Phyllis the other day to create the movie. And I've never processed it. We'll have to see how it goes. It'll be an adventure. Keep your fingers crossed for me. Then we will show another movie of the alternative approach. One approach is photographing on black velvet. That's what we'll start with. The other approach is photographing on a light box. That's where we'll go next. Time permitting, I've got a few more examples after that. I've got lots of examples. The question is how much time we have. We have a hard stop for another appointment in about an hour and a half, I think. So we'll just see how much we can get in. There's a lot of material to cover. Without further ado, I am going to share my screen. By all means, make this as much of a dialogue as you can with me, because that is some of the virtue of live webinars. I mean, in the time that since the sort of cautious end of the intense sheltering in place pandemic, as I think everyone knows, we've sort of gone down from doing maybe a webinar a week to a webinar every month or 6 weeks. And with this new schedule, I had to stop to think a lot, what's the benefit of doing it live as opposed to recordings? Well, nothing beats a live workshop. It just doesn't. But as a second best, a live webinar isn't bad because you can interact and you're sort of focused on the inspiration and paying attention as opposed to being a passive audience. So don't be passive. So this is the Blossfeldt effect. And where's my clicker? Here's my clicker. Clickers are good things. If you are here for the Ansel Adams effect, it's not the Ansel Adams effect. Creative garden photography is the most recent book that I've done. It's got a lot of techniques. By reference, my Blossfeldt technique effect uses lightbox photography and black velvet photography, both of which are discussed in some detail in garden photography. At the end of the webinar, we will have discount codes on the books. And thank you, Kathleen. And thank you, Mary, so very much also. I really so appreciate people who follow what I do and see the passion that we put into this. It's, you know, it's so far beyond what, I don't know how, I'm not even sure what I'm saying. But thank you. This is the French translation of our black and white book, and the table of contents of the black and white book. And the point of showing this here is to indicate that you can see under the creative black and white opportunities. I'm not a recipe person really when it comes to photography. What I like to teach really is how to become your most creative self. That's what I care about. But you will see that there are quite a few basic patterns or almost recipes listed here, one of which is the Karl Blossfeldt effect. And here's a Spanish translation of one of my earlier black and white books. And this is the Photographer's Black and White Handbook, another book on black and white photography I did for Monticello Studio Press. And it's an oversized book. It's really quite beautiful. And an earlier book on the idea that you can make black and white photography be basically high dynamic range. And of course, my passion being flower photography. Here's a very brief timeline for Karl Blossfeldt, who lived from 1865 to 1932. He started his work career as an apprentice at an iron foundry, I believe in the Harz Mountains in Germany. I'm not sure exactly where those mountains are, but he pretty quickly went, the iron foundry was a decorative iron foundry that specialized in botanical designs. And he very quickly sort of graduated to becoming their reference photographer. And to do that in that period, 1890 to 1896, he traveled extensively with his camera in Italy, North Africa, Greece, basically the southern Mediterranean. And that sounds like fun. I should say there also that he's one of my photographic heroes, most truly. If I look at photographers whose work has been meaningful to me going back a great many years, right up there with Edward Weston and Ansel Adams and André Cortege, and one or two others. Karl Blossfeldt is certainly there, and perhaps the greatest botanical artist that historically really up till now has been. I have to say, in terms of botanical art, in photography, I would also put Mapplethorpe there as a great botanical photographer. And also, and of course, painting, there's O'Keeffe. But anyhow, so his professional life expanded outwards, and he made a second marriage with an opera singer, Helene Wegener, who supported his work greatly, helped also introduce him to society. He got an appointment as a professor of fine arts in Berlin. And in 1926, a gallerist whose last name was Nerendorf introduced him to the world, really, and wrote the introduction to the first gravure book of his botanic plates. And that's when, about 6 years before he died, that's when he began to be known as a botanical artist. The book in question, translated roughly as Archetypes of Art, Botanical Photography, got a huge amount of attention. And then in 1929, he had an exhibition at the Bauhaus. So here are a few rephotographs I made of some of Blossfeldt's work. What you're looking at here is botanical work that in some respects is very simple. This is straight on, okay? It's patterned. The earlier the work is, the more Blossfeld's work is like architectural details, really, which is understandable if you think about where his roots came from. Um, the Of course, nature is patterned. I was photographing something yesterday that looks extremely like this is probably a seed pod cluster like a dandelion up close. One of the things to think about when you think about how he did his work in the beginning of the 20th century was that the tools for macro photography really weren't very readily available for the most part. He was using cameras that were plate film cameras with lenses and optics that he very much improvised. This is quite a accomplishment to have done what he did. Even as a technical matter, you can see in this one the tail of that could almost be done in wrought iron if you were delicate about the wrought iron. This is Blossfeldt as a successful fine art professor in Berlin and a known artist, obviously a studio portrait as they did. The pictures of him when he was younger and wandering through the southern Mediterranean, actually doing his work, show somebody who looks a lot more bohemian than this. All right, in terms of my own work, this fairly well-known image I made of a nautilus shell was in some ways what started me off on this. It's shown here on a black background. I photographed it on a light box, and I didn't really realize, I've seen this image and been requested to license it and so on over the years, and I hadn't really realized that it was photographed on a light box. It looked like a nautilus on a black background for me until one of the photo magazines asked me to trace how I had done it. I went back and looked at the files and I saw that it was on a light box. So that's why some of the Blossfeldian images that I've made are light box images in the first place, and then inverted, as I will show in the examples, to put onto a black background. As I started trying to analyze the photography or the photographs that Blossfeldt has done, you kind of need to separate out the framing of the image and the question of what kind of tinting is going to be there in the background, and from the actual subject matter, because the subject matter approach is really the most important thing. This goes along with what I've always liked to say regarding lightbox photography, that the most important part of it is arrangement, that how you set your photo up is much more difficult and ultimately more important than the technical aspects of making the image and processing it. This is probably true, by the way, for all kinds of photography. You see here dried delphinium buds arranged in an orderly progression. So you look for, when you're looking at the subject, you're looking at patterns of things like these here. And these are collections basically. And then the issue of how you tint it and how you get the border is really a separate sort of technical issue. I will show how to do this, of course, but keep in mind that really the important thing is focusing on a given subject and not so much on how you finish it off. I see a question mark and an interesting observation from Ron May in the chat box. Arrangement equals composition, question mark. No, it doesn't equal it, but it's necessary to it. If you're going to be doing a still life, the first part of creating a good composition is arrangement. you have something arranged, and then the composition it basically is add-ons to that. What angle are you taking it with? What point of view? What focal length lens? What slice of the thing are you taking? So the combination of the aesthetic decisions of photography um, and the um, and and the arrangement are what makes the composition in a totality. Incidentally, we're working on a current book on composition, and well, Phyllis and I are a little late on the book, but it's slated for early in 2022 at this point. And it's about the formal aspects of composition, essentially, how you treat composition as an issue of applied design. And in some ways, that's one of my current preoccupations in photography, is understanding that better. I should say regarding the finish of the Blossfeldt images that is somewhat imitated in this pop-over pod looking from above, that his work is known to us now through the books that he did. He never set about with photographic darkroom making prints. What he did was the books were done via gravure mostly, which is a high-end reproduction process. And so what you have are all these books with plates in it. A lot of art dealers at a certain point broke some of the books up, framed the individual plates, but that's what we know him from. Yeah, this image of a feather over a dried sunflower is in some sense not actually Blossfeldian, in that he probably would not have combined these things to make a composition. But this might, because there's it's not a squid, it's a columbine, I guess, a columbine blossom on a dark background. And again, something like this, just a free-floating twig, might be Blossfeldian. And here we have some anises and apple slices. This, I think, is another dried delphinium. So, when I go around looking for flowers, this is a lavender blossom or efflorescence. When I go around looking for flowers, depending on what frame of mind I'm in, I'm not always looking for the blossoms that are beautiful. I'm also looking for the ones that are Blossfeldian, basically. When he was looking for things to photograph, he very definitely was not looking for the wonderful bouquet that was, that you're going to put and decorate a table with. Here's the 5-cent version. This is explained in a bit more detail, really, in creative black and white, as the slide notes, pages 254 onward. We're going to look at this in the first example. So photograph as a straight ahead macro. Okay. Yeah, generally the Blossfeldt work that I've used, the lens that I use is the 50 millimeter Zeiss f2 macro. There's a reason here. It doesn't have to be the Zeiss macro, but there's a reason for using a macro lens, even if you're not necessarily within macro range, because you want this kind of, he used macro lenses, you want this kind of flat field, high depth of field look that is what a macro lens really gives you. And this is low-key HDR photography on a dark or black background, stepping by 1 EV. We'll go over this with the example for sure, but to see this in more detail, there's a webinar on our that you can find from our webinar recordings page that shows how to do photography on black. It goes into quite a bit of detail on it. It's also in both the garden photography book and the black and white book. So one of the points about the Blossfeldt images is most of them have a selective detail enhancement In the examples, I typically use topaz adjust detail too, but there are numerous other ways to do this. The one thing that is important is that you do be prepared to use layers and layer masking for it so that you can be selective. For example, on the ends of flowers, the black and white conversion in the examples, there are many ways to do black and white conversion. Of course, many of them are in my black and white books. But in the examples, I typically use Silver FX. And then I also apply a second duplicate to create more structure selectively in the image. And then the effect shown with the images that have the sort of sepia with the fuzzy edge are done by applying Silver FX yellow to an antique plate 1. There are other ways to go about it, but that's what I'm going to show you. And let's go through a few more of my Blossfeldian images. This actually is a little bit different as an image since it was captured with the Lens Baby 85mm macro as just an outdoor image and then converted to sepia and black and white. And no fooling around here with odd tinting, just a nice weed. The difference between a flower and a weed is in the eye of the beholder, right? Weeds are beautiful. So we're a series of things that are stalky. These are dried or poppy stalks. Here are grasses. So this is the sort of grass segment of the show. Here's the effect I was mentioning in the slide with the sepia and the fuzzy background. A twig, a Blossfeldian twig. And so this is a flower crown, basically. What happens with this is, the bottom part of it's the stalk, and then the top part, the flower, sits in this thing. But in this case, it's no longer there. So there's a very architectural sense to the Blossfeldt images, decorative ironwork, but also architectural archetypes. I mean, there's a massive quality to this work. Here, this is a fragment of lichen that that I just pulled off somewhere, a rock or a log or something, and brought back and photographed on black velvet. And this is the one, it's Queen's Anne's lace from above, photographed on a light box, as in the second example that I'll be showing you. And it's the one that got mistaken and sold as a genuine Blossfeldt image, to my amusement, fundamentally. And if you're interested, up on the Saatchi art site, I have a portfolio of limited edition homage to Karl Blossfeldt prints. Here's a discount code for the garden book. And I'm sure Phyllis will put those in the chat at some point too. And a discount code for the black and white book. Here's a slide with a short URL for the upcoming Flowers for Transparency workshop at the end of September. And here's how to reach me. Phyllis, you want to take it away?
Oh, really? Is it my turn already?
It's movie time. Ah, very, very sweet, Phyllis. But I don't have any sleeves today. All right. Okay, let's see where we go. Here are the raw files that that I shot of this, with the camera shown on black. 10 seconds at f22, and again, this used the 50 millimeters ICE macro and ISO 64. And this is the general technique of low-key HDR photography on black, as explained in the books and in the other webinar you can access for more details. The real point of going low-key here is to get rid of a burnout on the center Queen Anne's lace, which almost in this straight down looks like a cauliflower head or something. Ron, the way I choose this initial 10 seconds one is I look at what the light meter on my camera says is the right exposure for a general exposure here, not using spot metering, and I start there, and then I go darker one step at a time. So this would be half the exposure of the initial exposure, a quarter, an eighth, and a 16th, a 32nd, and at 0.3 seconds here, we're basically pretty close to black. So in terms of Ronald, in terms of lighting these, yeah, daylight's good. You want to be able to control the light somewhat. I mean, if it's direct window light, you don't want sunlight coming through, because that's going to really create burnt pockets. If you remember the Blossfeldt work, there's very little sense there of really dramatic lighting. It's mostly sort of soft daylight. So, these are all cameras on tripod. Exposure time, it can be whatever it needs to be. So the amount of light doesn't matter. The quality of it is more. And you probably don't want you probably don't want anything too spotlighty on it. So it's, an overall subdued soft lighting would be the best approach. If it's coming through your window, then you want it to be nice and soft. And again, as I was saying, the real point here in some ways visually is that you want to get rid of the darkest, you want to get rid of the highlights of the stuff. And ultimately, we're going to make this something like a square image also, but it's important when you start processing it that you don't crop it until after you've gone some distance on the image, because uncropped, it's easy to align things. Once you have cropped it down, alignment becomes more tricky. So I prepared for this webinar. It's the only preparation I've done for this part of it. So as I said, I'm flying without a safety net here. Reduced size versions of the images, because no one wants to have to sit through minutes and minutes of watching Photoshop do its thing on full high resolution images. So these are identical to the original raw versions, except they're opened and saved, in this case, as JPEGs. Let me open up the 0.3 second one in Photoshop. And there it is. You can see it's almost black, not quite. What I'm going to do here is save it, save as, and I'm going to save it as a PSD, not a JPEG, and I'm going to call it stack. Let's see if it'll work this time. Okay, this time it worked. Don't even get me started on that, people, please. Okay, so this is 1717, and it was the 0.3 second exposure. So you can see that I put that into the layers palette panel as what it is. And now let's open the next up one, which is the 0.6 second one. And I'm going to copy it over and align it with the 0.3 second one. So this is 716 0.6 second. Some comedy today. Okay, so let me just clear up my desktop a little because it's getting a little confusing. First of all, I don't need to have this up. Second of all, I'm going to go like that. And can everyone see what I'm doing here? I don't want my desktop to be obscure. And I'm going to make Photoshop bigger. Good, good, good. Okay, so now I'm going to put a hide all layer mask onto the upper layer. Layer, layer mask, hide all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to put it at 100% opacity, 100% flow, and I am going to start painting in whatever we got here. And there are a couple of different points here of doing things this way. One is that it keeps the background truly black, and two, it gets rid of the problem of the highlights on the inner cauliflower. So I'm beginning to be able to see it, but I don't think you are yet because Zoom. So we'll do the next one, which is 715. And I'm going to copy 715 over in alignment. There we go. And this was 1.3 seconds. And I'm going to put a hide all layer mask again. Layer, layer mask, hide all. I'm going to brush in this one, 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 this one. And then for the center, I'm going to brush it in, not quite at 100%, but at 75% opacity and 50% flow. The distinction being that flow is the rate that it comes out of the brush, and opacity is how opaque or transparent it is when it comes out. So let's go get the next one. Well, actually, let me clean up my desktop a little before that. Let me get to avoid confusion and delay. Let's go get 714, which is at 2.5 seconds. Going to make it a little smaller so that it's manageable, so you can see what it is. Oops. See, it's another thing that I'm sure I'm not the only one who suffered, which is having Photoshop put stuff on tabs when you don't want it on tabs. Particularly difficult to deal with on the real estate of a laptop, which is what I'm working with here, of course.
Harold, Ron would like to know if we grew the Queen Anne's lace or do we pick it in a field?
Yeah, well, it's funny. We just saw a field of Queen's Anne's lace yesterday, and I walk a lot in Tilden Park, which is the local park here. And yesterday I was walking under fields of Queen Anne's lace that were growing like over my head. So there are plenty of them out here. But I think this came from a store.
Yeah, I think you got it from Berkeley Bowl, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, our sort of local giant farmer, wonderful vegetable market.
Getting to the subject at hand also, away from the wonderful subject of flowers, Denise wants to know, are the subsequent layers or JPEGs? Once I've copied them over a PSD, they become part of a PSD file. You know, the file format here is close to irrelevant, actually. It's an important point. I'm glad you asked, Denise. Don't get misled because they said JPEGs. It just happened that the action that I used to make them smaller and manageable in size, I saved them as JPEGs, but it really doesn't matter. Nor, you know, I could have saved each individual file as a PSD. I probably should have. There's slight advantages to it in terms of in terms of degradation of file quality. But for these purposes, just think of them, you know, they could also be TIFFs. Just think of them as files. And once they're copied over, they're no longer JPEGs. Of course, ultimately, if I create an image I want to display on the web, I have to make a JPEG out of it too. I do need to see the layers panel for this, or I'm cooked. So here's the layers panel. Oh, that's funny. Okay, layer mask, hide all. This is the 2.5 second layer. I'm still at 75% for the cauliflower. It's not really a cauliflower, of course, but I'm painting it in, and that looks pretty good for it. And I am going to go back to 100%, but keep my flow at roughly 50% for the peripheral little Queen's Anne's laces. I must say, Matthew, my son, brought in an incredible seed pod for me to photograph yesterday. It was just incredible, complete, huge thing. It was beautiful. It was very Blossfeldian, very architectural. Yep, Zoom keeps updating, Connie. God help us. Okay, let's move in one last layer and call an end to this phase. So this will be the 5 second. And I'm going to make it a little smaller. And I'm going to go. Okay. So we get the routine by now. Close the old one because we don't need it no more. We don't need it anymore. Ah! Layer mask, hide all. And I still have my brush at 100%. I'm going to paint in this guy, paint in this guy, paint in this guy, paint in this guy, paint in this guy. Notice that I'm getting closer and closer as the opacity goes up. I don't want to paint in abnormalities in the black background. So that's part of why I'm a little more careful as I get higher up in the layer stack. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this layer stack to illustrate that you should always save stacks before you crunch them down. And now I'm going to crunch this stack down, merge down. I'm going to flatten my image. You know, there's what are the things that will actually lose you pixels in Photoshop, and flattening images are one of them. So that's why it's important to archive before you flatten a layer stack. So I have flattened it down, and now I will do a save as, and hopefully this time it will work for me. I'm going to call it A. I use a numbering system for the steps in my workflow that is traceable. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. Sometimes I even get up to Z. Oh, but that's a mess. But anyhow, the point here being that I don't really care if what you use is A, B, C, D, E, F, or 001, 002, but you should consider in your workflow, if your workflow is involved in Photoshop, that you do need a sequential way to understand which steps there are in order. Let's see if this will nicely crop into a square. Certainly going to crop it. So let's see, if I do a square like that, you know what? That's for this process, that's a little close. So I'll give up on the idea of square, and I'll just extend it out about like that here, out about like that here, put it up a little here, put it up a little here, and hit the check mark up here to lock in the crop. I'm going to save this as. I've kept my intermediate step. It seems foolish and waste space to keep all the intermediate steps, but sometimes or often when I don't, I regret it. So now let's do some selective sharpening on this in the second step of the list that I had. So I'm going to duplicate my layer, layer, duplicate layer, and then I'm going to go to Topaz Adjust, and I'm going to go to Details 2. This is on the Vibrant collection. Note that there are 2 versions of Topaz Adjust, and one of them is the sort of fairly straight filter program. The other is Topaz Studio. And it doesn't really matter which you use, they do the same thing. It's a matter of interface preference. Let's zoom in on this a bit and have a look at the difference before and after. Okay, this is with detail 2 applied at 100%. Here's with that layer off. This is at 300% magnification, so nothing ever really looks good at 300% magnification, but I think you get the idea. It's pretty different. Keep in mind that we're ultimately going to a monochromatic image here anyhow, so the kinds of sharpening you want are going to be selective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hide all layer mask, layer mask, hide all. And I'm going to take my brush at about 50% and I'm going to paint in toward the center of it with this detail too. This is going to add texture. Somebody asked me a few questions ago about texture. So one of the things you can do is add a texture and structure in post-production, and that's what we're doing a bit here. There are certainly other ways to do it. So here's what this layer looks like. It's probably pretty hard to see on your monitors via Zoom. Let me make this a little bit closer. I would say about doing it like this closer that you can kind of see the effect, but it doesn't necessarily give you a realistic look at what is happening. I generally recommend when you're reviewing images on your monitor to look at it at various different magnification levels. An image at 100% gives you a very different sense than one at 300%, than at 10%. You want to see thumbnails and you also want to see detailed views. But anyhow, there's what I did if you look at it more closely. So now I'm going to save this version and I'm going to layer it down, flatten image, so save as, and this, now we have our C version. And here's where we do a black and white conversion. So I will divide our black and white conversion into 2 different parts. The first part of it is going to be about simply making this a nice monochrome. The second part of it is going to be adding some of the fancy Blossfeldian border stuff. Okay. So what I do first is I duplicate my layer, and this is going to be a neutral, silver FX neutral. Obviously, there are many monochrome conversion programs out there, including the very good ones in Photoshop and Lightroom. I see 2 different requests here. Let me try to fulfill them. Oh, sure, I can do that. And why not use PS black and white conversion? I think I was just saying there's no good reason not to use it. So let's see. Kathleen, how's that? Basically fills my entire screen at this point. So I don't think I can make it much bigger than that and still work on the image. The why not use PS black and white conversion? I often do. So it's great to use. I love Silver FX though. Honestly, it's a great program. Karen says more rich black and white, but that's just to my eye. You know, yeah, there are things also, but you know, the Photoshop black and white infrared preset is great. So is the high contrast red preset. The part of the point of what I suggest with black and white processing is that you can pick and choose. You know, you like one part of one black and white process, that's fine. You like another part of another black and white process, that's fine too. You any point you want, you can grid it and do whatever you want. So that's part of what I like to teach, really. You know, I don't want to get too caught up in this webinar on the issues of black and white processing and choices. We have some recordings you can view on that, as well as 3 or 4 different books. So there's a lot to be said about it. And the reason I don't want to get too hung up on it is we have another example after this one that's actually more complicated. And, you know, it's, but good stuff. There are a lot of good black and white conversion programs. The Topaz black and white FX is nice. On One black and white is nice. The presets in Photoshop are nice. Using LAB and a couple of the adjustment facilities in Photoshop are also nice. You know what? I love them all. Yeah. Okay, let's make another, let's duplicate our background layer again. Note that I always, in black and white conversions, leave the color layer in at the bottom and cover it with something like Silver FX Neutral or the auto setting on the black and white adjustment in Photoshop. You cover it, so you leave it there so that you always have it if you want to go back to it. You know, part of the point of having a workflow is to have a way to reverse course if you need it. Okay, so I'm duping the original layer, duplicate layer. I bring my duplicate layer up at the top, and here we're going to put a Silver FX high structure. And I am following the outline in the slide that was in the presentation for this one. There are other ways to do this or go about it, but that's what I'm doing. And we're going to put a hide all layer mask. Oops, I'm too soon. I haven't done what I was supposed to do yet. Name change, fine. Here we are. Now I actually have to do the effect. By the way, there is a new version of the color FX and Silver, the so-called Nick FX program that DxO has just brought out. I haven't tried it yet, but it's good to know that they're keeping up with it. So here's the high structure plugin, and actually that looks pretty gosh darn cool to me. So now what I do is put a layer mask hide all on it. And once again, I'm going to selectively paint in the centers here. I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller, and note that I'm using the left bracket key on my keyboard to size it. I could go up on the drop-down list shown up here to size it, but to actually be able to see what you're doing is kind of cool. And I'm painting in. Let's just go have a look at what I did. Close. So there's without it, there's with the high structure. I'm at about 50% on image size, but I really need to see the whole image here. So I paint that in a bit, 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 and let's paint the periphery of our cauliflower here, which is really an attractive thing. Very pungent in smell too, if you ever work in a room with clean hand slaves. Okay, so I'm saving it, and I'm going to layer, flatten image, and I will save this as D. I want to point out something here, and that is that there was like a spot on my black velvet. So you can see it here. It's right around that area. This is a good a time as any to fix that, because who needs to go into the last stages of a Blossfeldian image with a spot on one's background? And you know, okay, here it's a spot, it doesn't matter so much, it's easy to fix in 10 ways to Sunday, but I want to show you the general technique you can use on black to fix something like this, because sometimes you have bigger things that are in there, tripod legs, I don't know, yeah, wrinkles in the background, all kinds of things. And generally, you want to sample the background color because it looks like it's black, but it's not exactly. Once you do that, in the Tools panel, the color you've sampled becomes the foreground color. You want to take a brush at 100%, 100% opacity, 100% flow. You want to right size the brush so you're not painting over things that you want for later stuff, and you just go pump and then wipe it out. That makes sense to everybody? Thank you, Carol. I so appreciate it when people say yes, yes. It's a good word. Okay, now let's see. So let's move into a Blossfeldian sort of, or my interpretation of a Blossfeldian gravure background here. So I'm going to duplicate my layer, duplicate layer, and I'm going to go back to the Nick collection. And once again, there are other ways to do this, but this is one way. Yes, Karen, it is more flexible than cloning or using some of the various tools that Photoshop supplies. Very, very powerful technique. Works on mostly black backgrounds or on white backgrounds as well. Highly recommend it. So I'm going to go to, let's see, yellow 2. Okay, like that. This is yellowed 2. Let's put it in as yellowed 2. And that's getting pretty good. I like it. One point, I'm not going to try to do this right here and now, but one point to think about is that within Silver FX, you can control the width of the borders. You also want to control how much black you've provided around your subject on the border, because the two are going to control the proportions of the thing within the frame. And, you know, it's not terrible here, but that's something I might in real life tweak a little bit. You can tweak it by extending the canvas as necessary and filling it in with the background color, or by cropping in whichever direction you're going. All right, now let's add the other element to this. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate my background layer, layer, duplicate layer, and running back into Nick again, I'm going to pick Antique Plate 1, and you'll see there's a complication, but we'll get there as we get there. Here's Antique Plate 1. Oh, Kathleen, a great idea. A class on creating borders. There's really a lot to be said about that. No. A lot to be said about it, indeed. There are two things that are wrong with this. If I were in a live class, a live workshop, I'd say, who can tell me what are the two things that are wrong with this? Yes, teacher. Well, okay, one, I totally don't have the beautiful yellow color now. A little bit of this antique plate, which has a so-called sepia tinting, is great. Maybe half of it, 50%, but I don't want all of it. Also, what I've done here is I've taken away the beautiful blurred background border. That's not good, okay? So here's how I'm gonna fix those things. I'm gonna put a layer mask on, this time a reveal all, a white layer mask. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is black, and I'm going to size my brush. Again, I'm using the bracket keys to put in the border going around. Of course, since I'm working on a layer mask, if I have done this badly, or I don't have enough of it, or I've gone too far, all I have to do is paint in the opposite color, and I get it back. It's not a problem. Take your time with this and be happy. I mean, it's really a very flexible style technique. Just going round again to make sure I get all of the border I want, like that. Now let's solve the other. So let me show you what the, see, where's my cursor? Let me show you what the other, I lost my cursor. That's a problem. There it is. Okay. So let me show you what the layer mask looks like. For some reason I hid in there. We'll have to, well, let's see if that, yeah, that takes it off. There's what my layer mask looks like. So I just painted out the border here. Now let's solve the other problem by putting the opacity of the antique layer down to 50%. There you go. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I can do in front of a live webinar with everything, this is a pretty cool Blossfeldian version of my Queen Anne's House. Any questions about this before we move on to example 2? Okay, Phyllis, take it away. Thank you, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
What does that snake have to do with anything?
Absolutely nothing. The snake nudger. Yep. Harold was the snake nudger.
So I have a question about subjects common in Latin names. Do you have any recommended resources for identification of subjects? Well, there's always Dr. Google. I mean, seriously, there are just huge references out there. I used to have to know things. Picture this, as Denise just said, is an iPhone app that does it. I recommend more generally, there's a book called Botany for Gardeners, and there's a book called Plant Identification uh, Terminology. Both of those have helped me along the way of figuring out how to do this. I mean, I slipped into being able to identify plants totally through some kind of weird back door, because it was never something I ever thought was going to be on my life path. And you know, it was more through gardening really, and being interested in loving flowers than identifying them. And really, for me, I don't really care if it's, you know, red rose, or if I actually know what kind of rose it is. I mean, I've bet, you know, I've learned the difference between old fashions and floribundas and so on, but that's mostly just out of interest. It doesn't really matter that much to the picture. I think that Blossfeldt was a genius, really, and that for somebody in his time and place, coming from a career where he started as an apprentice in a iron factory, to actually continue with the kind of work he did and the knowledge he did, he has to have been an incredible autodidact, and learned tremendous amounts about botany and about Linnaean classifications. Okay. So here are the raw files. Quarter of a second. Actually, I guess this was the first one. Once again, the question of where I started would have been because the light meter said so. I know that where the light meter says with this kind of work is going to be the darkest place I need to be. I used the Zeiss 100 millimeter macro on these because I wanted to spare my back and didn't need to be as close as a 50 millimeter would have indicated. But no other good reason for that. All of this, the EXIF data wasn't recorded here for the aperture, but they're all at f22. Here's half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, and that's beyond as light as one's going to need to be. Okay, let me right size that again. And let's see if this thing opens up into Photoshop nicely this time. So I didn't need to do that. Excuse me. I prepared reduced versions here. Okay, so this is 7-11 and it's at 8 seconds, and I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it as a PSD. Really doesn't matter that much what I save it as. TIFF would certainly be fine. PSD is fine. You could even save it as a JPEG. I mean, you know, poor. Oh, Phyllis, incredible! Thank you. It used to be that there was a huge prejudice against working in JPEGs because the more times you save, they're not lossless. That means that you lose some quality with generations, but it's the file qualities become good enough that you really have to do quite a lot for it to matter much. So anyhow, but yeah, I should work in PSDs or TIFFs, and this is 8 seconds. So what we're doing here is the opposite procedure to what we were doing with the on black. We're starting with the lightest version and moving darker as we go. So this is the 4 seconds, 7, 10, 4 seconds. And really, I said this is a trickier example. It's a trickier example because we want to end up with a black background, and we're starting with something on white. Layer mask, hide all. What we're starting with, by the way, for what it's worth, is a efflorescence of a succulent. So in other words, one of the succulents growing on our front porch decided it was time to flower. And eventually it got big and old, and I cut it off and brought it into photograph. Call me cruel. But we always hurt the ones we love.
Well, actually, Harold, it fell off, remember?
Oh, yeah, it did.
So we had nothing to do with it.
So we say.
There you go.
See how I'm changing the brush size depending what I'm painting in. I don't want to go over too much the edges here. The peril in this kind of work is what some people call the dread gray blurs, where if you skip a line, that isn't so much a problem with the on black side of this work, but with the work on white, it is in fact potentially a substantial issue, although there are techniques you can use to fix it when if it happens. And I'm actually pretty close to done with this with these 2 files. I don't really need all the rest. I need a bit more. You know, it looks a little blurry kind of, and that's an exposure issue, not a focus issue. So let's get the 2-second version in. Once again, I'm copying over. I'm using the select tool. I'm holding down the shift key. I'm pulling the layer over and letting it go. And that puts it in perfect alignment. You don't want to crop before you've done that. And we put a hide all layer mask on. Layer mask, hide all. And I am going to put my flow down to 50% and my opacity at, what's a nice number, Phyllis? Somewhere between 60 and 80? 72.
72. Sounds perfect.
Thanks. And we'll just paint in some, but not all of this, particularly the peripheries. I probably got a little bit of gray blur in up there, but such is life. You know, you can zoom in and be as careful as you want about this. One life lesson here is you always want to work right sized. You know, you want to work with a size brush that's appropriate for what you're painting. It's possible to have a brush that's too big easily. It's also possible to have a brush that's too small and makes things look nudgy and produces lines in the final result. Gail wants to ask, or does ask, a very perfectly great question, which is, why do I do it one at a time rather than all together? And well, first of all, as a general matter, there always are multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, and you perfectly well could import them all. But there's no part of the issue is that this gives me the chance to see what I want. You know, for example, I just said I'm only using the first 3 of these, the 8-second, 4-second, and 2-second. I don't need anything darker than that. Well, then if I'd imported them all, I wouldn't necessarily see that, and or at the very least, it would waste the effort. Also, this way you can be sure that things go on in the right order. it just gives me more of a sense of control over what I'm doing. However, if I had a student in a live workshop working on something like this in a flower for transparency issue, and and their workflow was that they imported them all in, and then if they wanted change the order of the layer stack or eliminated one or did one twice, I'd say more power to them. No reason not to do that if it makes you happier. I think it's easier to see what I'm doing though, and also pedagogically, besides being less confusing to me, to do them one at a time. And this is something, again, that depending on how close or far away you are, you could spend a lot of time doing. Just to illustrate the point, this little thing here, I could go like that, find the size of the thing. And, this is something that, depending on the subject and the level of care you want to take, might be a while. But for purposes of this demo, I am going to declare this done and save it here. This was photographed on a light box, sometimes called a light pad or a light table. So it's all backlit. Layer, flatten the image, save as, and we'll call this A. Now, last time to sharpen it, the image, I used Topaz Adjust details too. There are many ways to achieve the same result. So I could perfectly well do that here too. But since this image is going to have to go into LAB color anyhow, I'm going to use LAB sharpening on this rather than Topaz detail too. Mary, thank you for asking that again. Absolutely, I save an unflattened version before flattening. Yes, absolutely, all the time, 100%. So the flattened version is called stack.a. The unflattened version was called stack, and that's why I go through the A, B, C, D stuff. I have 5 or 6 webinars on LAB color up on our recordings that if this intrigues you as you see it, you can look through. Also a course at LinkedIn Learning I highly recommend. It's very well referenced. It's about a 2-hour course with multiple lessons and so on and so forth. I think you can get a free trial membership to LinkedIn Learning and watch it for free. Otherwise, libraries have it as free. So that's one way to go. I think a subscription to LinkedIn Learning is $20 or $30 a month. So you may want to be easy on that. So I'm going to convert this image to LAB color. Image mode, LAB color. There are some wrinkles in how you convert, but I'm not really going to get into that too much at this point. And now that I'm in LAB color, first of all, my channels are, it's like when you go into the Southern Hemisphere and the first time you see the Southern Cross at night as opposed to the Big Dipper, our channels are different. We no longer have RGB. We have lightness A and B here. So that's how we know we're in LAB color. And I duplicate my layer. I'm going to do my sharpening on the duplicate layer. Let's call it that. Let's go back to the layers. Okay, so in the channels panel, what I have to do is select the lightness channel. That's what the lightness channel looks like. It's the black and white, the grayscale information in my image. And I want to see all the channels, though, as I do this. So the eyeball in the channels panel is what makes you see things. What's selected is what is acted upon. So just going over that again, this is the way the channels panel looks out of the box. All 3 channels are selected. All channels are eyeballed. What we're doing right now is selecting the lightness channel and eyeballing all 3 channels. So now I'm just going to use a basic sharpening filter on it. I'm going to use the good old unsharp mask. And now let's see. Okay, I'm just centering the preview button so that we get a better sense of what it is. Going to up the threshold number, up the radius, and up the amount. This is going to make a really sharper image here. So going back to the layers panel, here's what it's like without the LAB sharpening. Let's look at this up close too. Okay, you can see there's a pretty considerable difference here. Some ways, I believe that LAB L-channel sharpening is the most attractive sharpening out there, beats any fancy piece of software as far as I'm concerned, and it's built right into Photoshop. Once again, I'm going to apply this selectively, layer mask, hide all, and I'm going to get my brush bigger. I'm going to put my opacity down to 42%. That's a good number. And just paint some of it in. Oh, should be more. Okay, this gives a sense of better resolution in a very Blossfeldian kind of way around the edges here without impacting the background. Now I'm going to save this because this is a major step here.
Harold, could you just zoom in and sort of turn the layer on and off so we can see what you did a little better? Just because it's kind of far away in Zoom. Thanks.
Okay, so this give a better sense of it.
Absolutely.
And here's what the, well, let's see, I better make this smaller. Here's what the layer mask looks like. Very roughly, very quickly painted in, as opposed to something that in real life might take a heck of a lot of time to do right. Is that Dudley do right? Okay, I have saved this. I'm going to layer it down, flatten image. And I'm going to save it as B. So I guess somebody was asking me whether I save each of these before I flatten them, and the answer is yes, I archive them. Now what we're going to do is we're going to flip black and white. Okay. So ready for this step? Enjoy. It's the meat of the matter. I select the lightness channel, make sure all 3 channels are visible, and I go image, adjust, adjustments, invert. Okay. Want to watch that again? Anybody? Yep. Okay. I'll take that as a yep. Make sure the lightness channel is adjusted and go image, adjustment, invert. Well, there's a bit of a problem here though, and we can maybe fix it. That is that parts of this, parts of the succulent efflorescence that got converted are a little bit dark. That's because they were black or had black in them, because this adjustment, inversion adjustment, will apply to anything that's basically black. So let's fix it. So I'm going to select all 3 channels. I'm going to duplicate my layer, layer mask. Oops, let me get back. Layer, duplicate layer. And what we're going to do is apply a curve to the foreground layer. So image, adjustment, curves. Okay. And here what you want to do is you want to make sure that the lightness channel is selected, and you want to pull the top thing on the line over. It doesn't really matter how you do it too much, but you want to end up with something that looks about like that. You see how that changes the incoming light into the efflorescence. Okay, so I'm going to click OK now, and this is a curve adjustment. Now, I don't particularly like how much it's done it up at the top, but I do like it in some of the darker spots. So the way I have to treat that is to put a layer mask on. Layer mask, hide all. Life is built of layer masks. So I'm going to put my brush like that, bring that in. See, this is what this means is you can selectively apply that. You can selectively apply that curve adjustment. Just because you've done it overall doesn't mean it has to be applied overall. And to some extent, this also creates a textural lighting effect. So I'm going to save it here. And then here's without the adjustment, here's with the adjustment, here's the layer mask I just painted. I just saved it. Now take note one thing, and that is that when you move between color spaces, you cannot do that. You can, but you should not do that with a layered document. You need to flatten before you go between spaces. So with that in mind, we go flatten image, and then I switch the mode back to RGB, and I'm going to save this as C. From here, my steps are going to be pretty much like in the last example, because what I have is I have a somewhat Blossfeldian image on a black background, and what I want to do is convert it to black and white and put a border on it. So let's first of all note that we're probably going to need some more space at the top and the bottom, because if we're going to put that border on, I'll just show this because it's worth showing. So let me change the canvas size. Let me sample the background color. So that's now the foreground color. And image, canvas size. And, oh, I see, canvas size. It showed up on my other monitor. How dare I? And the problem is now it won't let me get to the other monitor. Phyllis, help.
If you move your mouse across the middle, will that help?
No, it just is stuck at the border. And then I have the only dialogue that I have is on the other one. And until I do, there we go. I hit the enter key, but that's doesn't make me enthusiastic.
It's not what you wanted.
Not what I wanted. Let's see, what can I do about that? I suppose what I can do about it is move Photoshop over here for now so that it's, I don't know.
That's the problem with working with 2 monitors, and
it's a problem working with Zoom, I'm saying.
And Zoom.
Well, let me try it again and see whether at least I didn't have to reboot Photoshop. See, that's why you save at every point. Okay, so image, canvas size. Now we have the dialogue, but it's over on the other side. And I can reach it this time. Thank God.
Go figure, huh?
Go figure.
There it is.
There, we're going to use the foreground as the extension color, and we're going to bump the height by, let's say, try 2 inches. Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. So, you know, this is something in real life that you're going to want to play with. I mean, you know, it's possible that that might look weird at the bottom instead of good, but I wanted to show you that depending on the border you use, you may need to do that. And you may need to be careful about how much you extend it, you know, so on. Also important to use the color sampled from the actual image. So I'm going to just convert this in exactly the same way as last time. This is neutral here. Filter. Oh, you know, I tell you what. Let's do something different. Why be boring? Let's use. Oh, that's nice. That's just the default. What is infrared? Oh, I like that. Let's do that for sure. So this is. I'm gonna merge it down like that. This is Photoshop B&W adjustment IR preset. Cool. And then I'm going to put the Silver FX high structure on top of that. All kinds of interesting possibilities in here, let's face it. I'm going to up the contrast here a bit. Oh, that. Yeah, about like that. Okay, and so this is Nick high structure. Layer mask, high all. And let's paint in at a pretty high opacity, bunches of this stuff. So this gives some sense of textural variation in here, among other things. Okay.
Harold, when you're done, could you just zoom in and turn the layer on and off so we can see? Because it's a little hard. It's just, you know.
Sure. Phyllis, you're a demanding one.
That's me. We just can't lean over your shoulder quite.
Here, I'm going to zoom in a little more on it. Yeah, how's that as a hunk, so to speak? Okay, here's where we started with the color version of this after it came out of LAD color and the inversions. Here's with the Photoshop black and white IR preset. And here's with the Nick high structure masked into it. Fair enough?
Yep, looks great. Can see everything.
Good.
It's interesting how the high structure really just, you know, does add, you know, a little bit more definition and.
Absolutely, and that's really you put your nail on the head. I'm beginning to lose my loquaciousness, my facility with the verbal language.
I pounded that nail. There you go.
Yeah. But that's exactly right. That's why I use it almost invariably in this process because it adds a sense of variation to whatever's under it in a great way, without being too cruel about it. But as with many of these effects, you almost never want to do them at 100%. I mean, if you look at the mask I painted in, not only is it selective, but it's also never fully transparent. Okay, so I've archived that copy. I'm going to save it again, and let's apply the same border effect to it. So layer, duplicate layer, and going into Nick. Let's see, let's make this border a little bigger here. Right. Oh. It's a little less of the sort of blur, which can be a little over the top. This is yellow too with type 10 border. By the way, in terms of the best borders, I think anybody who's really interested in a lot of borders and not doing them totally manually should take a look at the On1 software set of border presets, which are really extraordinarily cool. Norman, I showed you one on black velvet. I often use a black velvet background. And sometimes other backgrounds too, by the way, or even outdoors. The 3D technique, could you clarify what we're talking about here? And let me just throw AP2 here. Duplicate layer. And once again, I'm going to go back into solar effects. Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Norman's referring to a series. I guess we did one or two webinars over the past year on this about how to use a series of light boxes to create a three-dimensional image, such as flowers in a vase on a light box. You know, it's a great idea, but I don't think I've done that with this style imagery. Obviously, there's no reason why not. So once again, you have the issue that it's too much and it defeats the purpose of the background. So what I do here again is I put a hide all layer mask on. I got that wrong. What I should do is put a reveal all layer mask on. So how do I fix that? Well, of course, I can go back in my history palette or hit Command Z and put the right kind of layer mask on. But also what I can do is I can use a simple invert command to change my black layer mask to white. Isn't that cool? Image adjustment invert. And now I have a reveal all layer mask on. Oh, wow. So 100% flow, 100% opacity. That's much too big. I gotta make it smaller. Almost as good as the music with that snake. Hey, Phyllis, where did you ever get that music? And there you have it. Very Blossfeldian as far as I'm concerned. Questions about this? Okay, taking off the yellow 2 and the AP1.
Harold, either you're doing a really good job explaining or everyone's very quiet today.
Or I've sort of bludgeoned them into submission. It's a lot of material in here.
Connie says, need to try it and practice, then I will have questions.
That's what I was saying about bludgeoning. Very fair, Connie.
Or as someone said once, drinking from a fire hose.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing. So this is your chance. I'm here. Ask questions. And we have to go pretty soon, right, Phyllis?
Right. But Norman has a question. Some subjects have some depth in them. Do you ever focus stack or just use a high f-stop?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, if I would need to focus stack, I would focus stack. And again, there is a section in Creative Garden Photography on how to focus stack. Mostly, I don't need to. Mostly, I would just use a high F number. Technically speaking, the higher the F number, the smaller the opening, the more depth of field. Confusing terminology, but so be it. But thank you. Great question, Norman. I was really excited to do this webinar because it's great to be able to do it after one's photographic hero like Karl Blossfeldt, and to actually show the specific techniques in this way. But you know, I do understand that this is a great deal of material and touches on many things, from LAB color to low-key HDR photography, high-key HDR photography. And yes, I use Blossfeldt. He is certainly one of my inspirations. What is it about that appeals to you? You know, it's hard to put my finger on that exactly, but there's a sense of order to his image, an understanding of the botanical universe that is just wonderful. I mean, there's a reason that he named his first book Archetypes. There's a sort of, if you look at this, it's almost as if you see the building blocks of the universe in detail, of the cosmos. Yeah, I mean, it's great observation and appreciation for what he photographed. And a lot of what he photographed, as I said in the beginning, are not, you know, they're not showgirls. They're detailed working portions of flowers and plants that are not otherwise appreciated, perhaps. Yes, LAB is great for sharpening images, but note that when you use it, you want to sharpen only the black channel, not the color information. That's part of the virtue of LAB sharpening, is exactly that you are only sharpening the black and white
on the lightness channel.
And the lightness channel. Thank you, Norman. Very nice of you to say. Yes, he is. There is a very masculine aspect to his aesthetic, which is interesting in the context of floral photography, because so much of what is at least conventionally assumed here is that it's a feminine aesthetic involving flowers. Personally, I like to think I sort of integrate that a bit, but thank you very much, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Be creative and stay mighty.